Hey there! Ever since the last, Unity up, a lot of people have been switching to the Godot engine from Unity, and so I wanted to create this video in which I would show you the Godot's UI and just the basic features. This tutorial won't feature any coding. If you would like to learn GDScript, you can watch my other tutorial videos where I dive a little bit deeper into that sort of stuff. But with that said, let's begin. So if you open Godot, this is the screen you should see. Obviously, you wouldn't have all these projects here, but still this is the basic layout. And of course, it's very intuitive. You can create a new project by clicking the New Project button. Now, here you can choose a couple of different things. You can of course name your project. I will just name this like tutorial. You can choose a project path. You can see that it has a default path already set. You can just click browse, and then I have a dedicated folder to my Godot project. Yes, I misspelled the name. This will stay. I won't fix it now. And you can just click select current folder, but you can see we have a little yellow text here that says the selected path is not empty. How we can fix that is just clicking this create folder button, and it will create a folder inside that previous folder with the project name as its name. Now we can choose a renderer. You can see we have three options available: forward, plus, mobile, or compatibility. And it explains here what each renderer is for. Forward plus is the high-end or advanced graphics, which are of course a bit slower to render, whereas compatibility is a bit lower end, but it performs much better on older devices, and mobile is somewhere in between. So I just click forward plus. Of course, depending on the project, you can choose another renderer, but for our tutorial this will suffice. So let's just click create and edit. So this is the screen you should see when Godot opens. As you can see, we have a nice 3D view. In this 3D view, you can rotate the camera by holding down the mouse wheel button. You can zoom by scrolling, and you can move the camera by pressing shift and mouse wheel and just dragging the cursor. Okay, and here we have a couple of different buttons. We'll go over each of them. So of course right now 3D is selected, but for me I usually create 2D games, and honestly just the default Godot engine is not really great for 3D games. There are some assets that you can download here in the asset library that help with 3D projects, but I like to create 2D games, and how I can switch to 2D view is by either creating some 2D nodes, we'll get to that later, or by switching up here to the 2D scene view. And as you can see, it changes it to a 2D view. Alright, under these buttons we have a little tab here, and as you can see we have something selected which is just named empty. This is a scene. Now in Godot, games are made up of several scenes, and you can switch between scenes in script, and you usually create separate scenes for menus, different levels, and stuff like that. Again, more on how to create menus in my tutorials. So yeah, as you can see here, it just says empty, which is because it is not saved yet. There isn't anything in this scene, but if you just look here into this other scene tab on the left, you can see that we have the option to create a root node. And depending on what game we like, we can create any node as a root node. I'll talk more about nodes later, but here we have some buttons, whether we want to create a 2D scene, a 3D scene, or a UI scene, but I would like to create a 2D scene. So as you can see, now I have a little thing here called node 2D, and now it says unsaved. And now, if I press Ctrl S, it opens up this window, save scene as, and we can give it a name. I'll just call it default.tscn, that is the extension of scenes in Godot, and I'll just click save. And as you can see, it is renamed to default up here, and over here in the file system tab, we have a default.tscn file. This file system tab, here you can see all of the files that you have put in your game folder, which we created in the beginning of the tutorial by clicking that button. Alright, now let's talk about playing. The way you launch a game is by clicking one of these buttons here. This big play button just plays the project regularly. It acts as if you would open that app. This button here only plays the currently edited scene, and this button lets you choose what scene you would like to play. I'll just press the big button here, but if I do that, a little window pops up that says that I have not selected a main scene. A main scene is the scene that will start once the game launches. Usually the main scene is like a menu in games, and as you can see, you can change this later, but for now I'll just select our current scene with this button. So it launches, and as you can see, it opened the game, and as you can see, it opened the game, but it's all gray. You can't see anything yet because we haven't added anything. So let's add something. The way in Godot, scenes are made up of nodes, a root node, and then a root node is the main node of a scene, and then all other nodes are a child of that root node. So now, as you can see, this node 2D is our root node, and if we have this selected, or just regularly, if we press this plus button, we can add another node. Now, as you can see, there are tons of nodes in Godot. Each one serves a specific purpose, and most of these are pretty self-explanatory. But basically, in Godot, if you want for all different functions or different purposes, you have different nodes. So if you want to display something on the screen, you would add the sprite. If you would want something to be controlled by the player, you would add a let me just find it. You can also search for nodes, not nodes. You could add a character body 2D, and if you want something to have collision, you could add a collision shape 2D or a collision polygon 2D. And as you can see, nodes are grouped by their purpose. We have 2D nodes, control nodes, which are UI, which is the UI stuff, and 3D nodes, and also just some other stuff like timers and things like that. So I will add, let's say, a character body to the scene. And then you can see this is just right now a point in space. It has nothing going for it. We have this inspector tab here. We have a couple of different things here, which are specific to this kind of node. Such as the up direction, which determines, well, which way is up. But Right now, if I would launch this scene again, the same thing would happen as last time, nothing would show up. That's because this is invisible. I can just see a little like marker here in the editor view, but this would not show up in game. That's because we haven't added a sprite to it. So with this character body selected, I'll again press the plus button, and I will add just a regular sprite 2D. There we go. And as you can see, again in the inspector tab, we have now different things than we did with the character body and like offset. But the most important thing for a sprite is this right here, the texture. And thankfully, in every Godot project, you have a default icon, which you can find here in the file system tab. And if you just drag this over to the texture tab and edit, as you can see, it added this icon as a texture. So now you can actually see it. But if you look to the left, there is a little warning sign next to our character body. And if we read what it says, then we can see that this node has no shape, so it can't collide or interact with other objects. Consider adding a collision shape 2D or collision polygon 2D as a child. So that's what we are going to do. I will add a collision shape 2D. Now the difference is that with collision polygon 2D, you can draw your own collisions. You can draw the shapes themselves, while with a collision shape 2D, you can select what shape would you like. So I will add the collision shape 2D. And as you can see, again, in the inspector tab, we have a shape property, and I can select something. This is a square, so I will select rectangle shape. And we have, it's kind of hard to see because it's blue, but if I just disable the visibility here, you can see that it added a small blue square. And I'll just grab these little handles on the side and drag it out to the sides of this icon, this our sprite, so that it matches it perfectly. There we go, and as you can see, it's nicely blue. That means that this node has collision. Alright, now let's run the scene. Let's see what happens. Well, nothing. It's in the corner. That's because we haven't wrote a script for it. We haven't done anything. Now, I've said that I wouldn't code in this tutorial, and that is true. However, thankfully, in Godot 4, there is a template for movement. So if I add a script by pressing this button here, you can see it says attach a new or existing script. A lot of things come up. We can change the language. Right now my only option is GD script. However, Godot does support C#, although from what I have heard it's not that great. GD script is better, so right now I'd recommend learning that language. It's actually quite simple. It's similar to Python. This inherits property. This is a character body 2D that can stay as it is. Class name is just, yeah, you don't need to focus on that. And this is the important thing, template. We can choose a couple of different things. We have a default template on our node, which, as you can see here, it says that it has a default Godot cycle methods, which means that there is a function, it's called in GDScript, for when the game launches, which is the ready function, and a function that executes every frame, which is the process function. We also have an empty template, which is, yeah, empty. But as you can see, for this character body 2D, we have a basic movement template, which is a platformer movement. And then here in the path, we can just add a different name for it. It said earlier that it doesn't recommend naming the scripts as the node itself or as the type of the nodes, so as character body 2D. So instead I'll just name it player.gd. In fact, I will also rename my character to player.gd. I can do this by double clicking here and just typing player. Now we can we can switch to this script view, where we can find all of our scripts here on the left hand side, but I can also press just this button next to my node, which will open the script attached to it. So as you can see, we have a lot of very sexy code here. This is all coded, so you don't need to change anything about this. Of course you can change these variables, but it works just as is. So if we launch the scene now, as you can see, our player falls down. That is because it has nothing to collide with, so I will fix that. Again, we need to add the node, but now I need to select this node 2D because I want this node to behave independently from the player. So I want it to be a sibling of the player, not a child of the player. So I will add a node, and the type of node I want is a static body. So I'll type in static body, and as you can see here we have a static body 2D. It also has a nice little description: a 2D physics body that can be moved by external forces. When moved manually, it doesn't affect other bodies in its path, so that is perfect for platforms or things like that. I'll double click on it and add it, and to it I'll also add the sprite and a collision shape as well. And I'll just do the same thing, so I'll drag the icon texture to this texture tab because I don't have any other textures, and then I'll set a rectangle shape and just adjust it. Alright, now these are all in the same place. I want to move them a bit more apart, since you know a player shouldn't be inside the platform. Now you can do this in a couple of different ways. If we click on the player or the platform, it doesn't matter. Both of them have a transform property. You can see here we have the position, rotation, scale, and the skew, and I think these are pretty self-explanatory, so I could just type in some values, like for example, I don't know, 300 and 200, and that would move it somewhere. But I would also like to be able to drag these across the screen. But if I just click on it and start dragging, as you can see, it only selected the collision shape 2D, not the static body 2D. The way we can fix this is by clicking this little icon up here, which group selected nodes, and if I click this, this thing showed up next to my static body 2D, which means that its children are not selectable from the viewport, and if I just click on it, it drags the whole thing. So I'll just drag this here. And just one more thing is that the player and the platform look very similar. Of course, if you would have different textures for them, this wouldn't be a problem. But just one useful thing is here again in the inspector tab, we have this visibility tab, and we have a modulate property, and here we can just change its color. So I just set it to black. And I know it looks a bit bluish, but that is of course because our collision shape it's actually black. So if I launch the game now, our player nicely falls down, and I can move around with the arrow keys and jump with the spacebar. That is the default movement code for Godot. Excellent. Now, there are just a couple of miscellaneous things that I want to talk about because they are pretty important. First off, you might have noticed that here we have a couple of things next to this inspector tab. We have a history tab, which is just the history what you did in the scene or just globally. And here we have a node tab, which is more important than the history tab. And under this we have two like sub tabs, groups and signals. Groups are basically you can group objects. So for example, I want this player to be in a group called player, so I'll just type in player and add, and as you can see we have a little icon here in the scene tab, and also here it displays that it is in the player group. Now over here in signals, which is the more exciting thing, we have some different signals which execute when different conditions are met. So for example here in this player, because it's a collision object 2D, we have a mouse entered and a mouse exited signal, and we can connect these to a certain script by double clicking it and selecting the script in this menu, and then just kicking it. You can also name this function. I like to leave it on the default name, and just connect it. And as you can see, it connected it. It added these two lines to our script that we created. Alright, and different nodes have different signals. So for example, you can detect collisions with another node using an area 2D node. As it also already says in the description, that a region of 2D space that detects collision object 2Ds and also area 2Ds, by the way, entering or exiting it. So that's really good for, like, I don't know, bullets, when you want to detect whether or not they hit the enemy. And also just one more thing is the settings of the project itself, or the project settings. You can access these by clicking this project button here and then project settings. We have a lot of different things here. I won't go into detail because it's just, you know, a lot of things, but basically here, you know, we have the name of the project. Also you can set the resolution of it, some audio, the default bus layout, some audio settings, the textures themselves, and just general things about the project. And also another important thing is the input map. So I'll just click on this show built-in actions for you. As you can see, these are the default inputs. There is a lot of them. If we click on our player script, you can see there is a line here that says input.isAction pressed, and then here it says UI accept. This is one of these default inputs in the game, but this means that let me just find UI accept. That means that the player will execute this line of code, which means that it will jump when enter or space are pressed. But for example, let's say that I want the player to jump if I press the W key instead of the space key. For that I will add a new action. I'll just name it W, and then I'll press add. I'll just disable this built-in factions button so I can see my inputs better. And here we have a W action, but for this we need to add events. So click on this plus button, and here you could add a mouse button input, a joypad button, joypad axis, but you could also add keys. You could, well, manually select it from this list, but the more easier way is to press is to click on this box and just press the W key on your keyboard. There we go, and as you can see it says W, or yeah, there we go. Edit, and if we close this and just change this to W and then launch our game again, we now jump with the W key. Alright, that was this introduction to Godot. I hope it was helpful to you if you are new to the Godot engine. And if you found it helpful, then please like and subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon. It helps a ton. Goodbye and take care.